What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Thought Leader Podcast, episode 12. I'm your host, Dylan Barr. Hey, what's the Thought Leader Podcast about? Great question. Let me tell you. We interview past, current thought leaders in the realm of health, wealth, and or relationships in hopes of reaching aspiring thought leaders, past, current, but most importantly, future thought leaders. Those of you out there that you have a message in your heart, you have a mastery in your mind, you want to give it out to the world. You want to leave your imprint in this lifetime. You want to leave your light, but you might be on the precipice of comfort and uncomfort. We talk to these thought leaders and understand their stories to hopefully inspire you, inform you, maybe something else. I don't know. Maybe make you laugh. Today, we speak with Jason Corder. It was a fun one. It's a little bit longer. I think we went 45, 50 minutes. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Jason Corder, born in San Francisco in 1969 when we went to the moon. He's a TEDx speaker, author, public speaker, singer, cultural envoy, and graduate of Swarthmore College. Previously, he enjoyed a 20-year career as a visual artist. You're going to find out that I didn't know what that meant at first. He was awarded a Ballinglen Fellowship and was a Sovereign European Art Prize nominee. He spent a while in France. Then he spent about a decade in Kenya. He put together Kenya's first comedy drama series, as well as its first reality show. During 2 decades abroad, he's a founder and CEO of Tactile, a company focused on tactile experiences. Full-time single father. He lives with his 3 sons in Arizona. The guy talks about grounding ourselves, and he symbolizes someone that's very spiritually grounded. It was a super fun interview that we had. We talked about our shared time in Kenya, never met while we were there, but potentially crossed paths. We talk about the power of your thoughts and how they can lead to action. We talk about how creatives and entrepreneurs have more in common than you might think. We talked about how to get back to social closeness in these years leading out of COVID, getting our feet on the ground, finding that person to hug daily in your life. Super fun, super knowledgeable being. It was an honor to interview the guy. So we're going to jump in, but before we do, make sure you're liking and subscribing to this. If you're enjoying it, if you like me, if you like our guests, drop what you like below. Drop a comment below of what you've been taking from these podcasts. The podcast is brought to you by Thought Leader. Over the last 8 years, Thought Leader has made it a mission to help its coaching and consulting clients get their authentic message out to the world in hopes of reaching their own desired audience through the power of speaking and business building. With over 650 clients landing TEDx talks, hundreds more speaking on virtual and physical stages around the world, Thought Leaders perfected the art of delivering a top-tier message. They also offer programs to help you build and scale your own high-ticket program and authentically market it. Sell it to your target audience in order to build a sustainably scaled business. If you have a message in your heart, if you have a mastery in your mind, if you want help getting outside your comfort zone so you can reach that desired audience, there are links below in the description. You can watch free webinars from Taylor. You can chat to people on the Thought Leader team, or you just listen to these podcasts and like it and subscribe and comment and tell us what you're learning. We really appreciate y'all. We really appreciate what we're building here. And as always, I hope you enjoy today's interview. Let's get to it, shall we? All right. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Thought Leader Podcast, episode 12. We're still fucking here. And I am here today with Jason Corder. Jason, mambo vipi?
Poa, kabisa. Na wewe?
Habari leo?
Oh, mzuri sana. Asante sana.
Sapi. Asante tumeshukuru.
Poa.
We will no longer be speaking in that language, but we are speaking in Swahili to each other. Jason and I share a commonality living in Kenya. So I lived in Kenya. For those that don't know, I lived in Kenya for about 3 years. Jason was there for a decade. And we found out before this podcast started recording that we actually overlapped. Never got to meet each other. We've overlapped before. I'm super happy to have him on the podcast today. We're going to be speaking in the realm of health. We're going to be talking about grounding experiences. We're going to be talking about social closeness. We're going to be talking about your company, Tactile Land, and what you do with speaking engagements. Super excited, Jason. But let's just start it off, man. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Huge pleasure to be here. And I'm already thinking about the places that we might have actually been in physical prep. We might have had some social closeness in Nairobi without even knowing it, or even in Naivasha. I was there sometimes. So it's a big pleasure to be here.
There's a chance we were both eating at that Ethiopian restaurant.
We could have both been like, because we would have, like, this is when you're eating Ethiopian, This is how it looks. There could be like a weird, if there was like a weird, like camera, hidden camera there 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And there's one shot we could find of like, I'm like this, and there's probably some food, like, on my face. And like, you're in the background there, like,
Yeah. The narrator circles you, the narrator circles me.
Right.
Little do they know.
Yep, exactly.
You are on the Thought Leader podcast. We're going to talk about your story in just a second here. A lot of creativity in your story, a lot of different experiences, a lot of arts. But the first question that I have for everybody, Jason, I'm sure you've seen other podcasts, is you're on the Thought Leader podcast. And the Thought Leader podcast, it's a pretty fucking vague term. Thought leader, right? It's subjective. It means something different for every person that's on here, for every person that's listening. So I like to turn it over to our guests. What does being a thought leader mean to Jason Corder?
Yeah, I love that. And I actually love the phrase. I loved it ever since I saw, as we all did, saw Taylor on Instagram. Couple things for me. I think, firstly, just the idea that thoughts and ideas are extremely powerful, and that they have their own value just as thoughts, if you will. Or I think thoughts to me is also the same as ideas, same really as dialogue. And so there's a real power in having dialogue, in learning new ideas from people. It's not just shooting the shit. It's, that's why so many millions and billions of people watch and crave watching podcasts and talks. It's why people like, Joe Rogan are so important to our culture right now. People like him. They're just sitting around expressing thoughts. That's all they're doing. But those are real. Those are meaningful, and they can affect people's lives. And I think, thoughts lead to actions. For me, who we are is our voice. And, our voices are thoughts coming out of us. So that's in a way, our thoughts, leading to what we're saying, that's really truly who we are. And we can really touch people with our thoughts. And so to me, it's an acknowledgement that there's value just in thought. There's value just in ideas and expressing them. And that's what I love also. And I think we all do at Thought Leader. That's what I love about the whole TEDx format. Because again, it's a format that champions just the idea itself, that as having a chance to transform people. So I guess actually that I said two things or multiple things, but that's probably really the way that I most see thought leader being important.
I love the common thread though of the two things that she said is like, there's almost like that surface level chatter that we'll have, whether it's in our own minds, whether that's out in the open, but the courage to then go deeper into these thoughts, number one, and then two, the courage to start expressing them and voicing them, right? Like I say courage because it takes getting a bit uncomfortable, right? Like it's almost like a dance, which I feel you're really going to like, because I'm understanding your story a little bit from the intro that we had for this. You have had a pretty creative story, right? You started young, you got into the visual arts, you did that for a decade, you traveled, you were in Europe, you were in Africa, you did like comedy dramas and you did reality shows. But I'm curious, like being a storyteller myself, I believe there is big power in stories. I think stories power time, right? And they power history. I'd be curious of Jason Corder's story in the arts and when it started. Like, do you recall when you had that initial spark to jump into the arts, to creativity?
Yeah, I like that. I like what you just said you said stories power time. I'm going to get to your question, but I love that. And I made me think of time powers stories, and then it becomes very cyclical. Anyway, yes, I remember the exact moment. And I mean this literally. I was lying in what we call the Crumb, which is the forest in Swarthmore, Swarthmore College, where I went to college outside of Philadelphia. And I was with my my girlfriend at the time, who I was in performing in Jesus Christ Superstar, and she was the director. Anyway, shout out to Sue McKee. And we were lying in the grass, and she was taking a studio art class, and she was drawing the woods or whatever. And I thought, oh, that's, because I had in high school, I was a math whiz for the most part. That was it's kind of my main thing, if you will. And when I arrived at Swarthmore, I took math, I took calculus or whatever. It never once occurred to me in my entire 18 years up to that point, or 19 years up to that point, that I could be an artist. So that was the moment. And because of that, I decided to sign up for studio art like the next semester. And I never looked back. I had this wonderful professor, Randall Exon, E-X-O-N, who is an incredible, famous, painter. And he pushed me right away to be an abstract painter. And he was like, I'm giving you the biggest brush and the biggest canvas because, I don't know, he saw that in me. And he just let me sort of go wild to some extent. And I never looked back after that. So, yeah, it's always girlfriends.
It is nuts. Yeah, thank you, girlfriends. You said Sue, right?
Sue McKee.
Shout out Sue McKee.
Sue McKee's awesome.
It's wild because you go from a left brain life being a man to this right brain life. Were you like, do you remember any shift in your expression when you start getting into painting, or is there something from math that helped fuel your painting at all?
That's a really good question. Well, how do I say this? I was in my whole childhood a singer, as in my dad taught me to sing. I loved singing, so I'd sing with him. We would sing harmonies and Beatles songs and all that. And music is, very, as you know, related to numbers and math, right? Yeah. There's a sort of connection. So that might have been percolating, if you will, under the surface. But and around the same time at Swarthmore, I started playing guitar, and then I became an actual singer-songwriter, which I've been ever since. And that started at the same time, which is the beginning of college. So I think, college, and just in a general way, being there at Swarthmore, I think it definitely brought out this creative side of me that I didn't know was fully there. That's for sure. And I think it probably did allow me to, in a way, maybe enliven the way I expressed myself and who I was as a person. But even though I was like this math guy in high school, I was still weird and zany, and I was doing drama as well. So I was always, in a sense, I guess you could say, I was always in the arts to some extent, but I just had never thought about visual arts or being an actual professional, painter or any of that. So I was raised on Monty Python's Flying Circus. So if anyone I was warped by the time I was 7 years old. So it was always there under the surface, just ready to come out like a really ugly beast.
It's nuts too, because I think a lot of people for the longest time look at college as like do this to invest in a 4-year degree and put it on your resume. And now looking back, for me, at least in hindsight, it seems a bit for you is like this time where we fully understand, like being away from home, who the hell am I? Right? Where you really get to find yourself. Like, do you recall, I want to get into the visual arts next, but stepping into this world of painting, like fully stepping out, right? Like, what was at the heart of it, of expressing yourself on a canvas or visually?
That's a good question, and that's a hard question to answer. It's usually pretty easy for me to answer questions. That really makes me think. One thing that comes to mind in answer to that is the kind of deep meditative flow state that artists get into to create in the moments when they're creating their art. And I noticed this for me. It was true in visual art. It's true when I'm writing a song. It's true when I'm brainstorming a TEDx talk or, et cetera, is that very, very deep creative flow state in which the conscious active mind turns off. Yeah. And this is something I always did talk about actually as a visual artist, I try to create situations in which that happens. Because I feel like when we can turn off that chatter, we can access, something in our heart, quote, or deep inside of us that is not always apparent to us. And so I think that was definitely something that I enjoyed and was drawn to from the beginning of visual art. And I think it helped inform that kind of creative space for me for all these other pursuits I've done in other media.
I mean, for being on the spot, that was a pretty damn good answer. I remember I
got lucky. It just came to me.
keep it going, man. We're close to at the time of this recording, close to St. Patty's Day, so we'll keep the luck going.
Yes, and my middle name is Patrick, by the way, and I'm very, very Irish.
I don't know if you could tell. No, but I was reading a book before. I believe it's called Stealing Fire, but it talks about flow state. They turn it into an acronym and they call it STER, STER, and it's in these moments. 4 things happen. We have this a selflessness. We're not thinking of ourselves at all, right? Timelessness, like we lose track of time. Effortlessness being the E. It's like what we're doing just comes effortlessly. Like you say, crafting a TEDx talk or in a painting or visual arts. And then the 4th one being resourcefulness, like feeling in touch with something higher. I know when I create our comics, I'm not the illustrator, I'm not the writer, but in the act of plotting and mapping things out, I completely lose myself, man. You had this moment getting into the arts, expressing yourself on canvas, but then it turned into visual arts, right? So I want to know now, you shifted, you got into visual arts, you were in Europe for a while, you were in Africa for a while. Can you kind of walk us through that part of the story? What got you into that? And did like the spark evolve? Did it change or was it the same?
Now I'm gonna just, can I clarify your question here?
Yeah, please.
You're saying I got into visual arts. Are you talking about the transition now to to film and TV from visual arts, or just really that space in my career that was the visual arts space, the painting?
Yeah, you're right, because visual would be everything.
Visual arts usually refers to just the paint, like painting and sculpture.
Shit, I'm the other way around. I'm thinking visual arts now. Then you get into
is the film and TV. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So let's walk through that part. Going into what visual arts, right? Painting, then shifting into your travel and getting more into behind the camera, or I don't know if you walk us through that.
Okay. Yeah. No, 100%. So yeah, I mean, after Swarthmore, I really carried on this career as a visual artist, as a painter, as a sometimes professor, but otherwise just painting, exhibiting my work. That carried on for the better part of 20 years. Okay. And a lot of that was in France. I actually had 2 years, way before all of this, in Ethiopia as well. So it was through all of that. And 4 years actually in San Francisco after college, before leaving the country. But now the transition into film and TV, into sort of media work, if you will. Again, is this another girlfriend story? I'm trying to see if it's coming. I'm going to lie and change it. But it was when, I don't think it was a girlfriend story. So it was when I got to Nairobi, Kenya, where you and I both had Ethiopian food across the restaurant from each other. And I fell into a role on what was then the biggest soap opera in East African history. Probably the most popular show ever made there, even up to now. It happened to be this crazy popular soap opera that would have been on while you were there as well. I think it was called Mali, M-A-L-I, which actually means wealth in Swahili. And I just, through a friend, a guy I knew who was himself an actor that actually has appeared in some films like The Constant Gardener, which was a famous film from back in the day. They hired me for this role as this kind of evil white guy. And that became my shtick going forward. So that was my first experience, literally. Oh, there is a girlfriend part of this too.
Shout out Sue again.
Well, and shout out to Sue. And now, so yeah, the first, let's say, girlfriend that I had in Kenya now, and this would have been 2008, 2009, after the end of my marriage, she suddenly turned to me one day and she said, "You have a lot of crazy, funny ideas. You should start writing scripts." And I thought, oh, and this was, I was already acting on the soap opera. Mm-hmm. I thought, oh, that's a good comment. That's a good idea. And I did. And I wrote my first script the first script was called Changa Delivery. And Changa, as you may know, is basically a moonshine that they would make in Kenya. Mm-hmm. And I devised this crazy idea. It was very Monty Python-esque. I knew this kind of little Scottish guy who was a producer there. And I had in my mind, he was the one that would arrive at the door, knock on the door, and they open the door. And there's these two Kenyan dudes who are like major stoners. And they'd just done like the largest like bong hit in the history of, East Africa. And the guy's like, "Hello, sir, I'm here to deliver your changa. We have 2 types of changa, etc." So it was like a 6-page, really silly script where he's trying to sell them moonshine and blah, blah. And that never went anywhere, of course. But the next script I wrote, which was about an interracial couple in Nairobi and all of the comedy and drama of all interracial relationships, that got funded out of nowhere overnight by Nokia, which was a company still back then that I think they then were bought by Microsoft and they don't even exist anymore. They handed me $100,000 overnight on the strength of a pilot that I shot in my apartment in Kilimani. And all of a sudden I was a TV producer, and I thought, wow, this is a lot easier than selling abstract paintings. So that's how I fell in. Damn, it was a girlfriend again. God damn it. But it was the role as well on Molly as the evil white guy. So.
The other sponsor for today's podcast is The Power of Love. Shout out The Power of Love. I'd love to go back to something that you just said, because I think a lot of people will hear that story. This is why at first I wanted to call this the uncomfortable thought leader, because I want to know about those times that were uncomfortable. I think a lot of people hear your story and they go, oh my gosh, she was funded $100,000 by Microsoft or Nokia. I could never get that. But you said before that you had the Changa delivery, which went nowhere, which potentially flopped. I think it's hilarious. Could you walk me through, like, what does it feel like sitting in that you still express yourself, right, through this work of art? It doesn't get the attention you want. Why do you keep going after that? Can you walk us through what it felt like and why you kind of just said, you know what, I'm going to keep trying for this?
That's a great question. Yeah, and that's, I think about this a lot, actually. I produce an unimaginable amount of content, art, ideas, and also I don't quite say the detritus of all that, the pitch decks, the presentations, the 30-page PDFs. I produce, my God, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of all of that all the time. And only a small part of it goes forward. I also do, this is kind of a side thing, but one of the things I made up when I was in Nairobi and found myself kind of there now after a marriage with essentially no job and et cetera. One of the things I started doing is I made up a career as what I called a cultural envoy, doing sort of short-term projects, creative projects for U.S. embassies across Africa. And I would usually working with young people, whether it was on visual art or film, and it was expressing an idea that the embassy wanted to, whether it was around religious tolerance or whatever. And the point is I have hundreds of proposals for projects like these, and we all do as creatives and entrepreneurs, right? And only a couple of them got picked up and went forward. For me, as an artist, I feel compelled, and this a little bit goes back to thought leader. I feel compelled, not consciously, subconsciously compelled to put these ideas out into the universe. And so again, it's back to that idea of thought. I have these thoughts in my brain, and they're so powerful that to me, they're so important to me. They really, the thought jumps into my brain from I don't know where, but I find it so inspiring that I feel compelled to create something lasting around that and send that energy out into the universe and send that energy out to touch other people. And so I think it's one, and I've heard sort of famous quotations from past artists, et cetera. It's, you can't control it. You can't stop it. I can't even turn it off and I think that's a lot of artists then deal with, how do I turn this off? And for a lot of us, and I had this problem when I was in Kenya for sure. And other times I talk about this actually in my TEDx talk, which is that I turned at times to drinking, and other artists do too, or to other drugs or other addictions, because we can't turn that compulsion in our brain or the chatter in the brain that's mulling over these ideas constantly. Yeah. And one of the only times and ways. Now, there's a lot of healthier ways, boys and girls, to turn these intrusive thoughts off, or this sort of compulsion off through other ways, which we'll talk about now in this better than Chardonnay. But I was always a cab guy. So yeah, I guess that's it.
I think it's beautiful too, and I am going to look at the other side, because I think a lot of creatives only continue to create if they get the recognition or the validation. And as much as you could say that the negative side of I can't shut this off, you know, sometimes we numb that, right? We've all been there. I think the beauty that's also in it too is I'm putting this out there because it's me. I'm not putting this out there to be like, what is it that other people, what's the validation I'm going to seek or get from it? It's, no, I am putting this out because I have these thoughts in my head that are so powerful. I want to express them. You said something, you're like, as it is for creatives or any entrepreneurs, and you lump them together. Like, a lot of people wouldn't do that. A lot of people are like, there's the business person entrepreneur, there's the creative. But I remember being in sales for a while. It's, you get into a flow state of continuing to work. I'll see the people. I'll have the presentations. I'll make the sales calls, and then, you know, eventually one person will buy. It's the same thing with the creative but it's what's fueling you is this this feeling to express yourself, right? And like sooner or later, one's going to pick up. How has so now I'm kind of curious with all of that, with what you're doing now, right? Tactile Land. Like, you're coming from a place of just constantly expressing yourself, being a painter in France, throughout Europe for 2 decades, right? I'm sure having your own uncomfortable moments there and also awesome moments, and then going to Africa and expressing yourself there and having some failures, but also some big hits. How has all of that shaped what you do now with Tactile Land? And of course, tell us about what Tactile Land is. 2-parter.
Okay. All right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So Tactile Land, just to give some context here, is a company that I've literally just started. It's really going to be a brand across, all sort of social media platforms. And it's really going to encompass in many ways almost everything of what I do. It's going to be a space to connect with me, but it's going to offer a lot more than that. I think ultimately it's going to be a company that offers our clients tactile experiences. And I know most people know what tactile means, but not everyone does. It is a little bit of a weird old word. So it means basically sensory. So experiences that touch the senses, essentially is what it means. Something that's tangible. And I think, this is a big part of my work now, and very much a big part of the TEDx talk that I did that'll be, coming out quite soon, et cetera, which is all about really what we call energy. And this is a funny one too, because this is an energy that the West, quote, still sees as kind of a non-scientific entity that we can't see, that's invisible, whereas the East, in China, as you know, they talk about it as chi. Everyone accepts that that's just totally normal and real, and it's there. But I feel like that's a thread in all of my work and in Tactile Land, is giving people energy, whether it's in a TEDx talk, whether it's through a song that I write and record, or a comedy video, or any of that. It's hoping to touch people's hearts, maybe give them a moment to open up their heart on some level, or in any event, just kind of infuse them with a bit of, I could say, loving. Feel like a lot of times nurturing. When I was a painter, I got a lot of comments always, oh, that painting makes me feel very calm. It makes me feel kind of soothed. It makes me feel maybe grounded. And I think that is something that I want and hope to give to people through my art, and through Tactile Land, as well as kind of the embodiment of that, is giving them a chance to connect with, whether that's myself, maybe connect with the earth, connect with their higher power, and a moment to sort of receive energy, if you will.
So with it, what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I appreciate hearing we were talking before this that I had it confused with tactical, right? So tactile, right? Having these senses, having these experiences, and giving clientele these experiences, using their senses to tap to something in them a bit higher, right? Chi, or ki in Japanese, or prana in India, right? It's like having a physical experience, physical senses that then help you tap into something higher than that. Is that it? Yeah,
you got it. That's a perfect way of putting it. And I think, because you asked about the Tactile Land as a company, as I said, we will be offering physical in-person experiences to people that give exactly what you're talking about. But I think it is also, as a solo sort of practitioner, if you will, and speaker, et cetera, I think it's also something that I hope to do on a personal level, with the work that I do as a public speaker.
Yeah.
Which is, it's intertwined with Tactile as a company, but anyway, just to explain that.
And you're in Thought Leader. Like you said, you've mentioned the TEDx talk. Is the TEDx talk that's getting ready to come out, is it going to go into kind of the philosophy behind this, or does it go a little bit more into it?
Yeah, it does. It definitely goes into it. I mean, it focuses on what I call social closeness, which is kind of an antidote in a way, as a phrase, for the last 5 years, if you will, but not just the last 5 years, because I feel like technology, the intense changes in our culture through technology of the last 20 years, 25 years, we've already been, and now I'm getting into a whole nother sort of TEDx talk I've been developing, but which is how we're more and more disconnected from each other and from the earth itself, I think, because of our use of technology. And it's only been exacerbated by the events of the last 3 or 4 years. And so, yeah, I think I lost my train of thought right there.
No, I came into it because I am curious how you came to. You talk of social closeness in Tactile, or Tactile land. Yeah. You came to it. It sounds like just. Do you recall a moment in your story where you're like, "Holy shit, something is missing here," right? Like, of course, we could look back now. I mean, we're talking on fucking StreamYard right now, using technology to communicate. Right. It's like baked into our existence, which has great parts about it, but there's also a lot of detriment. Do you recall a moment where you're like, whoa, we're missing something here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been thinking about that a lot. It definitely, for me, is kind of an accumulation of a lot of different experiences that led to these thoughts, in a sense, and led to them finally coalescing into essentially a TED, in my case, a 9-minute talk. But I will say that definitely, I think what was the final catalyst for me to kind of essentially embrace these ideas and this idea of social closeness, I think it was ultimately as a response to, the disconnection that we all suffered from the last, 5 years around the world. I think that's what finally it was, let's say maybe around 2022 or whatever, as we were kind of coming out of the pandemic, et cetera. I think that's what it was. One of the things I definitely know that really pushed me to coalesce this idea and create this phrase, social closeness, was noticing, even after the pandemic was ostensibly over, or the worst parts of it, that all of the signs and stickers and reminders to stay away from each other were still up.
Yeah.
And I find that very sad. It makes me kind of like, this is a reference that probably only people my age will get. It makes me feel like Garp from Robin Williams from The World According to Garp, of wanting to run around and yelling at hey guys, it's okay, take it down now. That sign that says stay away from your loved one, take it down. It's depressing for us. And I think it was a reaction to that, of like, no man, being apart from each other is definitely not good for us. It's definitely not helping, and it's definitely causing a lot of pain and feelings of disconnection that we already had. So I think that was kind of like the one catalyst, is that kind of pushback, if you will, on the idea of social distancing. But it certainly was the end of quite a long journey of getting there as well.
Yeah, it's almost this slow burn, and then all of a sudden everything that happens 5 years ago, it's like, whoa, what the hell? Yeah. And then we're past it, but then not past it, if that makes sense. And you're like, what the hell? Do you remember what you did specifically to kind of break that cycle for yourself?
I mean, that's a good question. I was never really, except maybe in the very first couple of months of the pandemic or something, I personally never felt afraid of other people. And I think I always kept a sense of feeling like it's good to be near people. And I don't know how much of that was conscious. So I don't know that it was so much of a change for me to like, okay, but yeah, yeah, definitely those experiences of seeing these horrible reminders of something that nobody likes or wants, and we were all kind of waiting for it to be over and expecting there to almost be like this big celebration in the streets, right? I think that's what we kind of all thought is, when it's over, we're going to all just go fucking apeshit wild out in the streets and hug and party and dance, and it's going to be this big celebration of culture and this like celebratory time of like we got through this, let's come back together again. And instead there was kind of this slow, steady, sad decline that just continued on the same path into a space of disconnection.
Yeah, because one of the things you talk about is aloneness, you know, people living in isolation and the negative effects it has on us. Yeah, can you talk a little bit more to that, the things that you see, the things that you've been learning as because there's a lot of people that still live a world of isolation after the time of COVID, right? What have you seen, and what have you seen the negative effects being of that?
Yeah, so many people still do.
A lot,
so many
man.
people. It's incredibly sad, and I experienced a kind of version of that when I was so many years away from home, and especially like in Nairobi, and you know, it may sound weird. Okay, you're a TV producer, you know, famous actor there, and well, I was sort of a well-known arty celebrity all that time. Sure, did I have a lot of friends? Yeah. Did I, you know, go out and all that? How could you be alone? I think, you know, there's something about home, and there's something about our kind of our own homes, our own sort of cultures, that is a space that we can feel fully loved and supported. It's not that that can't happen halfway around the world, but for myself, I think I felt very much like a fish out of water on many levels, especially with the circle of, you know, I friends that I had there. So I felt in many ways quite alone during that time. And that's not, you know, I had incredible creative times, mostly with a lot of younger Kenyan artists. And that was absolutely beautiful. Most of the work I did was it was more in the, I'll be honest, it was more in the sort of quote expat circle of friends that I had, that there was no one like me there. And most people that are drawn to going there are not sort of quite as weird as I am. So I felt very alone a lot. And so I experienced that for sure myself. And I only came back to this country 5 years ago. And it's been like this time of really literally getting to know my own home again, and my own, you know, sort of culture, if you will. Yeah. But for so many people around the world, they are alone. A lot of older people, obviously, but it's not just older people. It's a lot of young people who have suffer from so much anxiety that leaving the house is challenging. And we know this is true. It was true before the pandemic, but obviously it's gotten a lot worse. And, you know, there's the emotional side of that can even be fatal, obviously. The mental and emotional side of that can be brutal for people. But and this is something I talk about in my TEDx talk, there actually is a physical, even scientifically measurable side to it too, which is that, and this is what social closeness is about, is that we have what we call these microbiomes, right? We have millions of weird little looking, sort of fantastical looking Star Wars type creatures all over our skin, literally, and all around us all the time. And that's actually a good thing, it turns out. And those guys help keep this kind of balance. And in fact, it turns out, and there's, again, I cite studies from Oxford and the NIH on this in my talk. When we're close enough to someone else to physically touch them or be in their physical space, we actually exchange, it just happens automatically. We exchange parts of our microbiomes, and it turns out that the greater the diversity of our microbiomes, the greater our health and the greater our immune systems and all of that. So it is one of the reasons why people who live alone, literally, based on, again, on sort of mainstream studies, die younger. Because the more, and I think, I don't know if you know Zach Bush, who's a sort of incredible thinker and doctor and et cetera. He talks about the number one thing that you can do right now for your mental and physical health, if you want to do anything, is go outside and be in as many and diverse environments as you possibly can. And that includes being around as many and diverse people as you possibly can. That's good for us. And I think we used to have so much more of that before the technological advances of the last couple of decades. And obviously now going back 100, 200 years more, it feels like there was more and more social closeness and more people being physically in close contact with each other. And that is something that is being diminished by our relationships with technology, especially.
It's so cool to hear you talk about it, because I want to get to the, like, what's the biggest detriment of it, but you're touching on it, right? People are dying young. People aren't getting these biomes right for themselves. I mean, you could cite Oxford all you want. You had me at Star Wars. I'm like, yeah, I'm in. As a fantasy guy, I'm like, I get what you're talking about.
That's awesome.
But, so for you, someone that has found themselves, you know, more isolated, more to themselves in these last 5 years, like, it'd be easy to take Zach Bush's idea and be like, all right, tomorrow I'm going to go see every different person I can, which it's not going to, we're not going to pendulum shift all the way to the other side.
No.
What do you think, like, just to start to get outside that comfort zone again, what do you think is the first step for someone that's like, yeah, I do feel a little isolated? Even the person that's just like, I'm going to work and coming home, right? Like, what's the first step for them to get a little bit more close to social closeness, as you would say?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have to respond to that. That was one of the best lines I've maybe ever heard. I'm going to do that from now on. Instead of citing Oxford, I'll be like,
all this away. Star Wars.
You know, so according to one of the lines in Act 2 of The Empire Strikes Back, 56% of all Wookiees. No, that's awesome.
I'm in. I'm listening.
Yeah, right. Probably most, to be honest, most listeners would be more likely to be in on that than some acronym. There's a couple things that come to mind. They're both actually I talk about in my talk as well. Well, one of them I would say for sure is starting with connecting with nature and getting energy from nature, and actually getting what is literally a magnetic reset from touching, from, you know, grounding, which is just literally standing barefoot on the earth. It's not just, it turns out, it's not just munchy, crunchy, hippy dippy, feel good grounding. Oh, I feel grounded right now. It's literally a battery we're standing on, and we are electromagnetic beings. And there's something with ions. No, I don't delve as that deep into that part, but I get it. So I would say for anyone who is alone, who lives alone, who feels very alone, if you're literally near a forest or even just a bare patch of earth in your backyard or whatever, if you could go 15 minutes each day and just go and just take off your shoes and socks and put those feet on the ground. I know that sounds very hippy dippy, crunchy munchy, but you will feel it right away. You will literally feel it right away. To me, it's a feeling of, I'm getting energy. I feel more. It does, and again, according to Return of the Jedi.
There we go. I'm listening. I've been listening the whole time.
I know, right? Oh, now it's good. It actually does a ton of things. I mean, it boosts your immune system. It decreases anxiety. I mean, it just goes on and on. That literally just touching the earth for a few minutes a day can do that. So that for me would be the starting point, because at least you can still do that even if you're alone. And that's, you know, this is part of my kind of journey back to life, if you will, after being gone for so long. But that is what I did here in Sedona, Arizona, where I'm, you know, lucky enough to live right now, and has hundreds of miles of hiking trails and all around. Is I would just walk all day long. These just the trails near where I was living, and really starting to sort of connect to the earth and connect to the trees and plants that were there. And I felt still very alone. I didn't have any friends here or anything like that, but I started to feel like there was love and support and even a kind of friendship literally from the trees and plants and from nature. And I think I didn't know what was going on then, really. I didn't know I was grounding, and I didn't know as much about all this as I do now. But I think that's part of there is energy there for us to get, and it actually feels, it can feel loving. Yeah. So that was my first answer. My second answer would be, and this is also again in my talk, but I think, you know, what I say in the talk is, you know, find someone that will hug you every day, who's happy for you to hug them. I think that, you know, we all have, or most of us have some kind of family. Most of us have maybe some kind of circle of friends, even though there's a lot of us who are totally alone. But in any event, there's probably one person that each of us can think of that would probably be okay with a hug every day. I notice it. There's been times when I don't have a big, honestly, to be totally frank, a big social circle here at all. I'm mostly just with my I have 3 boys. So I'm mostly just with my sons and my family. But I just noticed those moments of like hugging my 9-year-old is such an incredibly special experience. I can feel obviously love and kind of support. I feel the kind of exchange of the microbiomes, and it's just, maybe it's even when it happens less, because I'm someone who also is, it's ironic because I'm giving all this advice, if you will, and I'm someone who's somewhat still alone in my life here, other than with my family, but it just makes it so exquisite, that moment of like the warmth of the skin touching and all of that. So I think if we can find someone who's willing to do that with us every day, that's a good start.
I think it's even more so powerful to hear it from you, like you said, other than the family. It's like, okay, cool, you got 3 people, you found them, and you're willing to tap into that, right? Where someone could easily be like, well, it's easy for you. You have all these friends that you could go hug every day. You're like, no, I've just found the people that are close. And this is what I want to wind down with, right? We're getting close to record for longest podcast. I think right now you're second or third.
I love the sound of my own voice, so I'll just go on and on. So.
I love it too. No, but you've said it a couple of times, so I don't say it to poke fun because I'm very similar, right? But you say like it's the hippy dippy thing or it's the munchy crunchy thing, and it sucks that, like, I remember doing qigong when I lived in Naivasha. I did it every day. I had a qigong routine and a meditation routine. I got my feet on the ground, and there's a power that comes from it, right? There's a calmness that comes from it, and it sucks that you use those words now and it's labeled hippy dippy munchy crunchy, right? You seem like a weird guy, right? Like, but I say that as a positive. You're welcome. You're a self-acclaimed freak, which I would call myself a freak show. It's weird that we live in that world, but that also means you're consistently getting outside your comfort zone. What people would say is comfortable, you're like, I want to live here. Actually, just outside of it, whether it's expressing yourself through your art, whether it's talking about ideas that are new to people in a time where we've been isolated and to ourselves. Why for you, Jason Corder, is it so important to get outside your comfort zone and do it consistently?
That's a great question. I feel like my whole life in some way was really structured by being raised literally as like a 4-year-old on Monty Python's Flying Circus. It's literally the hook of my talk. I shout out to my dad, who's enjoying himself probably much more on the other side, who warped my mind with that. But the reason I'm bringing that up is, first of all, the world and the reality that's created in that old British comedy show is very much a world outside of anybody's comfort zone. The whole point in some ways of the show is to push people to be in completely uncomfortable places. And I think that's something that comedy does, in general, which is one of the reasons I actually am drawn to comedy, and I'm going to be starting to do it and do more of it, because it is a space that allows for that type of completely wild and weird experience, and we appreciate it. We love it as an audience. We want to see our comedians put us in, or want to feel them put us in uncomfortable places. But in another way, it makes me think of something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, which is I call it the flexible mind, or the liquid mind, or the liquidity of thought. And what I mean by that is, I feel like there's some people who really are able to allow their minds to go in totally unexpected directions, and they're comfortable. They're okay with that. I feel like so much of our sort of, quote, mainstream culture and the sort of narrative that we get from the media is always stay in your lane, focus on one thing, be good at only one thing and be the best at that. And that's, and it's all very rigid. It's all very sort of mono. It's always just do one, don't do two. And for me, all art is, one of the things I've always said as a little quote is, without dichotomy, there can be no balance. In other words, unless we have 2 different sides of a spectrum, there's no way of finding a balance within those. So this is all kind of a long way of answering that and saying that I think that when we allow ourselves to kind of have a more flexible mind, a more liquid mind, it allows for a lot, much more sort of transformative experiences, transformative ideas. I think that's something that thought leaders are doing, is that they're creating ideas that have multiple sources and they're in a sense, they're taking multiple ideas and synthesizing them. And so that's, to me, the excitement of getting out of one's comfort zone, is that it's almost like, 1 + 1 = 3. It's like when we bring in more than just one idea, when we allow ourselves to swim down different lanes, what comes out of that can be really beautiful and really exciting. But it takes an openness to be a little bit uncomfortable for a while, because, for example, as I'm maybe thinking about a new TEDx idea, or I'm brainstorming a new, film idea or something, I might have a bunch of competing ideas, and I have to let myself be comfortable with those competing ideas all existing at the same time, and allowing that I know I'm going to get there. I know in a matter of minutes or hours or days or whatever, I'll get to what I want to do, and it's okay that I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this. So I don't know how to. I guess you didn't ask me. It makes me think of how do we teach that. So that's maybe a question for another day.
I think. I want to wrap it on that. If you see me looking down as you're talking, I'm connecting all of these things that you've talked about. We're getting to the end of today's podcast. I want to thank you first and foremost, because here's my biggest takeaways from Jason Corder today. Right? If I were to kind of go from top to bottom, speaking to our listeners who are on the edge of getting uncomfortable, like talking to start of the power of your thoughts and knowing those powers, because it leads to action, right? We've talked about then the action of that almost being like it's a motor that constantly goes. It's the same for entrepreneurs as it is for creatives, and to lean into that. Right? You've had hundreds and hundreds of scripts, just like someone's had hundreds and hundreds of sales conversations or people they've talked to about their business ideas. You do it because there's something deeper that you love, right? We then talk about getting your feet on the ground, getting back to this social closeness, even if we're doing it for ourselves first. And the thing that I love at the end that you talked about is like Star Wars, as they would say in Star Wars, maybe. No, be weird and be willing to see and experience that other side, that dichotomy. It will be uncomfortable to start, but if you're willing to go through that uncomfort, it leads to the excitement. It leads to something entertaining. And with that, all of that to say, I want to thank you so much for, 1, what you stand for, 2, the life that you've lived, and 3, what you've got to teach us today. I really hope our viewers, as you listen to this, you're able to take something away. Please make sure you like and subscribe. Drop your favorite thing that Jason said today in the comments, and we will definitely be chatting again. You have more TEDx Talks coming out. Jason Corder, thank you so much for today. It truly, truly means a lot.
Thank you, Dylan. Hugely appreciate it. And it's really wonderful to connect with you two and hear some of your story as well. I think we have a lot more to talk about in the future as well.
I'll end it with nakupenda sana. Asante tumashukuru.
Uzuri sana, asante.